Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and start with our first webinar in our anxiety series. How does anxiety affect children with learning differences? This is scheduled to go from 12 to 12:45. I will do hopefully the best I can to keep within that time frame and then leave some time for questions if there's any questions that you might have. To introduce myself, my name is Jodi Johnston. I'm the principal and director of admissions at Billiart School, Lyndhurst. I have been principal for a number of years. I've been at Billiart School for about 23 years. Prior to becoming a principal, I taught in the 5th and 6th grade level here at JB. I'm excited to bring you this webinar series on anxiety. I am a mom of 2 boys, so not only have I learned a lot about anxiety from the work that I do at Billiart School, but both of my sons are also diagnosed with anxiety. One is diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with general anxiety, and my younger son has been diagnosed with social anxiety. As we go through the webinar and the presentation, please make sure that you use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll make sure to answer any questions that you might have. Right now, my option was to share my whole screen. So I will make sure that I am texting with Kayla and Sam so that I can get the questions if they pop up throughout the webinar. So anxiety overview. Developmentally, usually children are going to feel anxious at different times in their lives. Sometimes when they're little, there's the separation anxiety that they may feel. They don't want to leave mom and dad, or they may cry for a little bit once mom and dad drop them off at, a babysitter's or grandparents' house or aunts and uncle's house. That sometimes grows into that fear of pretend things. So they're worried about the monster in their closet. They may be worried about the monster under their bed, but things that aren't real, but they may fear something happening that is not real. And then that moves on to like fear of real things, worrying about maybe, what if there's a fire in the house, or what if we're driving the car and we get in a car accident. And so developmentally, these fears are normal and things that kids have to go through each stage to kind of feel comfortable, with their surroundings and with the people that are taking care of them. General anxiety is when things become a little bit more extreme. So it's not just your normal, typical anxiety. They may be anxious about a variety of things. It may be where it's focused internally and they're not necessarily talking about everything that they're nervous about, but you can kind of tell by their body language and some of the nonverbal things that they may be doing that they're feeling anxious. And it's not just a simple worry. It's excessive. It's been going on for a long time. It kind of stops them in their tracks if they're doing something. So it's not just a simple, oh, I'm worried about this presentation, or, oh, I'm worried about trying out for the soccer team. This is something that goes on for a long time, and it really impacts the child's kind of success in making friends, or in being in school, or being able to complete homework and all of those things. And we'll kind of go through how it impacts kids in school, especially if there are other learning challenges going on. Social anxiety is definitely being excessively self-conscious. So it's not just feeling shy or being nervous about going into things. It is sometimes a heart-stopping fear that I can't go into this room because I'm really scared that everyone's going to be talking about me, or I have no idea what I'm going to say to these people at this party or in this new school, and I really don't know what to do. But it's excessively being self-conscious about something that has to deal with that social language or the social situations that come up. So classroom, play dates, sports teams, all of those things where you have to interact with others. That social anxiety is an excessive self-consciousness that happens. You should definitely talk to your child's doctor if you feel that your child is exhibiting anxiety. If it seems to be very extreme, or it seems to last beyond normal ages, if it's causing your child to get upset or kind of having tantrums, if you're expecting them to do something that you think they should be able to do, but they're really refusing or having a hard time doing it, If it keeps your child from doing things and you're recognizing that they really want to go outside and play with the kids in the neighborhood, they're just scared or nervous about how to do that. Or if it's causing physical symptoms. So if you're hearing them complain that they have a headache or a stomach ache or they're not feeling well, those are symptoms and signs that maybe you might need to kind of bring in a professional and go see the doctor. I know that when my sons were diagnosed with anxiety, we were there for my older son, and the questions that the doctor was asking, do they have, does he have specific food choices that only eats certain things? Do you find that he picks at his fingernails and things like that, which didn't describe my older son, but totally described my younger son. So the questions that the doctors ask really help you realize that sometimes anxiety looks very different between two different kids and, even from the same family. But it's important that if it's starting to kind of impact your child and seems to be kind of extreme and going beyond that typical age of maybe 6, 7, or 8, that you do kind of talk with the doctor. So some of the anxiety thoughts that kind of happen is when kids kind of catastrophize everything. So here at Julie Billiart School and with the social thinking theory that we use, and it's also used in other places, we talk about little problem versus big problem. So they may think that the worst thing is going to happen if they're going to try to do something. So it may be that, they're not going to attempt to try out for the soccer team because if they go out there, they're going to fall down or they're going to break a leg, or it's something that's just really like the worst thing that could possibly happen. And it prevents them from doing anything, and especially things that they might want to do. So we always talk about little problem, big problem, and that the reaction needs to be similar to, this is a little problem versus this is a big problem. But their focus is always going to be on the worst case scenario. So one of the things that we try to do, and one of the things that I have learned to do is, ask your child, what is the worst thing that could possibly happen? So, in school, as kids are getting into high school and college, what's the worst thing that could happen if you really can't wake yourself up and you're as a, a freshman in college? The worst thing that's possibly going to happen is that you may flunk out of school. What is the best thing that could possibly happen? Well, the best thing that could happen is that you might realize that you are able to do this independently and you've been able to do it all the time. And where is it possibly going to be? So it may not be that the worst thing that's going to happen is what's going to end up happening, and it may not be the best thing, but it may be in the middle. So kind of helping temper the fact that it's not going to be on either end of the scenario. It's just going to be kind of maybe somewhere in the middle, and what you can do or work on things to help get you to maybe closer to that better case scenario. The other thing, and this is something that even I just use, is this going to be a problem next week? So if it's really just, well, I'm nervous about studying for this test, and, you're studying and their child is really focusing on trying to do the best that they can. Or maybe they're avoiding to study for the week. Is it going to be a problem next week? So you have this test, it's going to get you, you're going to focus on it for this week. Next week, you're not going to have to worry about it. So let's focus a little bit on what we need to do right now and recognize that we're not going to have to worry about that moving into the future. The other thing is that all or nothing thinking that sometimes kids have, and it's very black and white. It may be they go out to recess and they'll tell the teacher, no one likes me, or I don't have any friends. Or they may come home and they're working on homework and it's like, I'm never going to get this, or I don't understand it at all. And, I'm not learning how to do this, or I'm never going to get it. So one of the ways that you can respond to that is it true? Like, do you really not have any friends? What happened at recess when you went outside? Did someone ask you to play? Were you running around? Many times we have kids who may say, I don't have any friends, but yet they have been playing at recess time. It may just be that there might be one person that they really wanted to be friends with or really hang out with, and they didn't hang out with at that recess period. So trying to phrase things a little bit more accurately. You have friends because I've seen you talk with so-and-so, or I know that you can get this because I've seen you answer this question, yesterday or the day before. So really kind of focusing on the different things that are happening in that scenario, but putting a little bit more of a positive spin on it and getting them to see things in a little bit more accurate picture. If you have, siblings at home and he's saying, well, they never like me or they never let me hang out with them. pointing out times where they may have sat and watched TV with them, or, point out the times where you guys did go and do something and everybody was together. So you want to kind of help use some questions to lead them into answering things in a more positive way, and then pointing out that positivity. But it's important to help them realize that there's a lot of shades of gray in that thinking, and it's not necessarily just, this way or that way. Also magnifying the negative and minimizing the positive. So we always try to talk on positive mental attitude, because a lot of times kids will say, they'll focus on just the negative part of that situation. So if they are getting ready to take a test, or they were working on a writing assignment, and they're seeing things that they might have gotten wrong, they're only going to focus on what was actually wrong and what was marked wrong. They're not going to focus on the rest of the parts that might have been marked correctly. Or they may have gone in and they may have really invited a friend over, and so they're having a play date at home, and they're thinking to themselves, well, I wanted them to be able to do this when we were here, and I wanted to be able to play this certain game, and we didn't play that game, so it must have been an awful experience, and it's not exactly what I wanted it to be, and so it's just wrong, and it's not good. So kind of helping them acknowledge, yeah, you did want to play that game, but instead of that game, you guys came to a compromise and worked together and figured out this game to play. And you guys seem to be enjoying yourself. When I came in and saw you guys in the class, or in the, your bedroom, you were playing and you were having fun and you were laughing. Or when they're looking at their assignments, look at all of these ones that you got correct. Prior to this, you didn't think you were going to be able to get anything correct, and you were able to get, a 60% or an 80% on those. So acknowledge the negative, because you do have to take ownership of them, and you want them to see that things can be bad and good at the same time. And just because something might not have gone according to plan, that you do have that opportunity to look at the positive side of things. So, talking through things and making sure that they're seeing, what they did correctly in that certain situation. Personalization happens a lot of times when you're believing that things are only directed at you. So as teachers, sometimes we use, it's called pivot praise, and it's when you're recognizing the positive behaviors of others in the classroom, or you're focusing on what everybody needs to do. So the teacher might say, it's getting a little bit too loud in here, let's quiet down. And the student may feel that it's being directed at them, like, oh my gosh, my teacher feels that I was talking too much, but I wasn't really talking. And so why is she saying that to me if I wasn't talking? And they start taking things personally, instead of recognizing that it's something that might be said to the whole group. And we have to recognize that, if it was directed towards us, usually it would be something that would be acknowledged outside of the main situation. If it's just a general comment, it may be that it's just only for certain people that weren't able to kind of keep things down if it was a quiet, independent work activity. So trying to look at that situation as a whole. So, my teachers yelled at me and said it was too loud. Okay, well, was it said to the whole class? Yes. Okay, so were you being too noisy during that time? Well, I was talking with a friend. Well, were you talking really loud, or was it kind of quiet? Well, it was quiet. Okay, so then your teacher may not have been talking to you. Sometimes people say that to get everybody to recognize that, little quiet conversations may be happening, but then together it becomes a little bit too loud. Something that also happens with our kids is they may say, well, I walked in, to the room, and the teachers told everybody, get your book bags and put them in the locker and make sure you have your homework turned in. And, I was already doing that. So why would the teacher tell me to do that? So again, it's looking at the situation as a whole and getting them to recognize that it may not have been a personal comment to you. It may just be something that they say for the greater good or for the good of the whole group. We talk about at Julie Billiart School that we're trying to follow the group plan and making sure that everyone's following, what those expectations are. So sometimes, it may be just questioning the student to say, okay, so when everyone comes in, what's the routine? Well, we put our book bag away after we take everything out of our book bag. We turn in all of our homework. Okay, so is that something that you do every day? Yeah, I'm pretty good at doing that. Okay, so are there maybe some students in the class that need some help or support with that? Could the reminders be something that they were saying just to maybe one or two students? Yeah, that could be it. So it's getting them to see it, the big picture, and following and understanding that sometimes it's done for the group plan and not necessarily for each individual person. There's also the mind reading, and this happens a lot, I think, with kids with social anxiety and with just general anxiety. So you kind of believe you know what everyone else is thinking. So, I know that when kids come into the classroom, normally when anybody enters a room, you kind of stop and you look to see who has entered the room. Sometimes when our kids have some severe anxiety and it's that general anxiety or it's that social anxiety, they are making the assumption that everyone was talking about them, and that's why they were looking, because they knew that they were walking through at the door at that time, and they were talking about them, and they stopped immediately from talking because they knew that they were coming in and they were talking about them. And that's not the case. Or it may be that, I'm not going to ask that person to play because he's not going to say no because he's not going to want to play with me. Or I'm not going to try out for the soccer team because if I try out for the soccer team, I'm not going to make it. So the kids are going to think I'm weird for even trying out. So it's making an assumption that you know what other people are thinking. And it's really kind of hard for them to recognize that there are other things that are happening or other thoughts that may be occurring in other people's minds that they don't even know about. So we usually respond and kind of saying, well, what if the situation was reversed? So if you were sitting at your desk and someone else came into the classroom, what do you typically do? Well, I typically look or see what's happening. Or if someone walks in the classroom, are you always talking about the person that's walking into the classroom? No. Okay, so if you're walking in, there may be 1,000 different things that could be happening. Maybe they were looking because they were expecting someone to be coming in at that time. Or maybe they were turning to look because they were waiting for you to come in because they wanted to tell you something. So there are a lot of different ways to look at a situation. And so it's making sure that you're, acknowledging that, yes, it's a thought that they're having, but what else could that person be thinking? What else could be going on? If you try out for soccer, maybe a lot of people are trying out for the very first time. So no one's going to be saying, oh, well, you shouldn't try out or you're weird for trying out. Maybe other people think that you may be thinking that about them. And if you're not going to think that about them, then you have to assume that others are not going to be thinking about it yourself. So it's working on trying to reverse that situation, giving them another phrase or wording or how to think about the situation in hand or in mind. And finally, we have kind of that forecasting, making predictions. And again, because students with anxiety are focusing really on the negative types of things, the predictions are never going to be a great prediction. So it's not going to be, oh, you know what, I'm going to ask this question and the teacher is going to say, what a great question, and answer it for everyone else that's involved. It's always going to be kind of negative. So like, well, I'm not going to ask a question because the teacher's going to be mad at me for asking a question. Or I'm not going to ask this student to play at recess time because they're going to yell at me for asking them to play. So it's making sure that you are kind of giving them different questions to ask. That could be one outcome, but how often does that happen? Or what's another outcome that could take place? You may ask the students to play a game outside at recess, and they're going to be thrilled that you came up with a great game for them to play, and other kids may join in. Or you may never know what the student may want to play if you don't ask to at least kind of hang out and do something at recess together. Or, I'm not going to ask my mom if I can have someone over because she's not going to want anyone over at the house. So it's making those predictions and trying to give them to look at other outcomes that could happen. One of the things with anxiety that's kind of important is, making sure that it's a lot of questioning. All of these questions are kind of going on in their mind anyhow. So if they're having some of these thoughts, it's kind of helping to them label the thoughts. So if you're recognizing, oh, you know what, that sounds like you're trying to mind read what everyone else is going to think, or, you're kind of thinking like it's all or nothing. So giving that label to their thoughts and letting them know that, other people have these thoughts, but this is what we need to do instead, or this is what we need to think instead. So you always want to validate the way they think. Someone's thoughts are their perceptions, but you have to work on helping them with other people's perceptions and other ways to look at things. This is really difficult when it comes to anxiety, kind of in a comorbidity. So, my older son has attention deficit with hyperactivity. He's combined and has general anxiety. And it's kind of like a vicious circle. So he may forget to do all of his homework, and then he gets anxious about not doing his homework. And then he gets anxious in class, and then he forgets to pay attention in class. And then another assignment was assigned to him, and he may not have recognized that the assignment was even given to him. Or he's in class and he's not able to pay attention, or he's focusing on something else. And then he gets nervous because he's thinking, what did I miss? And then as he's focusing on what he missed, he's still being inattentive, and then he's missing out on more instruction. And then he gets home and has a hard time, understanding what he's supposed to do. So when you have things that automatically kind of get in the way of your learning, it's always difficult when anxiety is on top of that, because it can be a vicious circle, and anxiety can look like many different things. So when it comes to kind of how it presents in the classroom, a lot of times it's inattention. They're having a hard time focusing because they're having a hard time ignoring all those thoughts that are in their head. They may appear on and focused and intending on paying attention, but then they lose track because, again, they start to focus on something that happens. Or if you're talking about an assignment in class, or if you're talking about something that they're going to be doing over the weekend, they may be really listening to you, but then something that's said causes them to start worrying. And so the focus becomes on that, and they're not able to focus on what's going on, whether you're talking to them and it's something at home, or whether they're in the classroom. There also tends to be some attendance issues. So this always happens, if it's a long weekend or a vacation, or an extended, weekend when there's like a Friday off or a Monday off. Especially with that social anxiety, because they get used to being away from the situation, and it's hard for them to come to terms with what they need to do in order to kind of approach that situation again. So you may get a lot of, I'm not feeling well, or I have a stomach hurt or a stomach ache, or I have a headache, because they're really nervous about coming to school because they've lost that routine and they've lost that structure, even from just a weekend or a long weekend. So we want to put things in place, and we'll talk a little bit about how to handle that. But if your child is talking about like not wanting to go to school today because he's not feeling well, or is at school and kind of goes to the nurse's office quite a bit, to try to go home, that's going to be something that you may notice. That is something that we notice at school if there's an issue with attendance. Disruptive behavior. So it may be also something that kind of comes up in the classroom. A lot of questions that may come up at home if you're trying to explain something, but they have 15 different questions that they're asking you. They're trying to focus and figure out things that they can kind of control. So they have difficulty with changes in behavior. So they may act out, they might have a meltdown because they were not expecting this to happen. And so it causes them to be anxious. It's that fight, flight, or freeze kind of symptom that happens where they're not sure what to do because they weren't expecting it. And so now there's all these other thoughts that are going on in their heads as to how they're going to handle the situation, what they're going to do with the situation. They may perseverate on certain topics or questions that you may be talking about. So if they're in class and they're going over a worksheet in class and they're going over the instructions, there may be a lot of questions. Well, what happens if we don't finish this worksheet in class together? Or what happens if I'm not sure what we're supposed to do, and what happens if I have questions? Or did the directions, when you said these directions, it may be like, well, are we supposed to circle something, or are we supposed to write something down? And it may be where it's harder for them to start or initiate the task at hand. Or it may be that they're anxious about getting something wrong on the test, and so they avoid doing the work altogether. And so they may get up out of their seat and start walking around the classroom. They may, if it's at home, they may go upstairs to their room or try to avoid a situation, or they may start an argument with their brother or sister. So the behavior that's disruptive can be kind of acting out, but it can also be things that are a little bit more subdued, but also kind of impede or stop them from completing something that they want to do. Or, if you have a family plan that you're doing, it might be all of the questions that they're asking about, like, well, when are we leaving? Who's going to be there? How long are we going to be staying there? It's all of those things that are kind of making them nervous or anxious about the things that they don't know that they want to try to be able to control. The other thing that happens too is if they don't participate in class. So if they avoid eye contact, or if they kind of act busy when the teacher's ready to call on someone, that social anxiety is they don't want to be the center of attention. They don't want to answer a question and get it wrong and then feel like they don't know anything, or kids are going to make fun of them if they don't get the answer correct. So they may try to avoid that situation entirely, or they may worry that they don't want to answer the question because they don't think they're going to get the answer correct, or they don't think the teacher's going to be satisfied with the answer that they're giving. So a lot of times they may try to avoid participating in class. When it comes time to work on these types of things with school for the inattention or the attendance or disruptive behavior. So with the inattention, it's trying to keep things as hands-on as possible, having that visual schedule as well as something that they're hearing, so that if they have kind of zoned out a little bit because they're worried about some things that are going on in their head or the questions that they're having, they're not only going to be listening to what's the directions are, but they're also going to be seeing it. So I know, we had posters up in our house, what the expectations were when we sat down for dinner, or how long I expected them to be at the table or close to the table when we were eating for dinner, because sometimes that anxiety was getting in the way of them being able to, sit down and eat or answer questions because they were worried about other things that were happening. So if they're having a hard time focusing, we have a lot of sensory things that are in the classroom. Sometimes if they're doing something, they're forgetting about being nervous or anxious because their body is doing movement in the classroom. So we have a lot of sensory things that are in the classroom, a lot of movement that can happen. But we always try to repeat directions. You always try to have that visual on the board or on a worksheet piece of paper, color coding things, doing things that they can always refer back to. The teachers up, especially in the older grades, use Google Classroom so that they are able to refer back to things. There'll be links for the kids to look at that give examples, whether it's a Brain Pop video or Khan Academy or something like that. At home, if it's inattention and is having a hard time focusing, it may be writing it down on paper. And if you're asking them to do something, you're kind of giving them the schedule of what it's going to look like, so that they know exactly what's happening. Attendance issues, we really do, that's something that comes under my purview. The teachers may send emails saying, we really missed so-and-so at school, we really would like for them to be here. It may be where it's the principal that reaches out and asks, can I ask why so-and-so is absent, or you've been absent so many days, is there something that we can do to help out? At home, it may be really just saying to them, like, I know you're not feeling well, but you're going to have to push through. A lot of times, once you start doing something that you're having anxiety about, that anxiety kind of dissipates and goes away once you've started or initiated the process. So it may be just kind of saying to them, I'm sorry, but you really have to get to school. It may be giving them something that they can hold on to in their pocket that is a memento from you. So it might be like a little stone that you give them, a worry rock, and you can say, this is me. So when you're worried about things, just kind of rub the rock or rub something or look at something. But do what you can to try to get them into the building for the day. And then the disruptive behavior, if it's at home and things are getting disruptive, it's making sure that you're labeling that behavior, trying to be as descriptive as possible. So you may say, I noticed that you were really yelling, but I think it's because you were worried about what was going to happen next and where we were going to have to go, at 4:00. So, let's go over the schedule one more time, or let's write down the schedule so that you know what exactly is going to happen. So it's helping them kind of have control of that situation. And it's also labeling and using some of those descriptive phrases so that they know that what they're feeling is normal for them, but they have to be able to work through it and what they can do to work through it. And then when it comes to participating in class, a lot of times the teachers may, call the student's name ahead of time so that they know that they're going to be asked a question. It may be a lot of wait time. And so, the teacher may say, raise a quiet hand when you know. It could be doing different things that are more like online and kind of quizzes, whether it's quizzes or Kahoot or something where they're able to answer questions, but they're not having to answer it in front of everyone. So they feel a little bit more comfortable answering those questions because it's not something that everyone is going to see their answer to. The other thing that happens is there are sometimes learning challenges. So it may be, anxiety around testing, anxiety around their ability to do things. It may be if they already have a learning disability, whether it's a specific learning disability or a traumatic brain injury or attention deficit, they may recognize that other kids in class are kind of getting things a little bit easier in certain subjects that they may not get as easy or they may have difficulty with. So then they start being anxious and having self-doubt that, well, so-and-so has this and I, is understanding this and I'm not getting it at all. Or the teacher explained it and everybody else understood, but except for me. So it's recognizing that those, learning challenges might be something that is causing the anxiety, but the anxiety could also be a symptom of a learning challenge. And so if they already have an ETR or an IEP, you can work with the teacher on coming up with, structure and routine to help with those learning challenges. But it's making sure that they're feeling comfortable and secure in what they know so that it's not kind of exacerbating and causing more challenges. If they're being too anxious and they're missing out on some of the instruction, it's going to cause learning problems because they're not getting the instruction that they need to have. But if they have learning challenges, that anxiety might be just recognizing that they're not learning or understanding things as soon as possible, or as soon as maybe everyone else, or who they feel, everyone else does. So it's just recognizing those things. Again, labeling the feelings that they're having and kind of working through and giving those descriptive situations to them so that they're able to, see what's happening and understand what's happening in the classroom. The other thing that happens is not turning in homework. This happens a lot of times with attention deficit. It also happens with anxiety. And again, this is why sometimes the symptoms of anxiety can look and mimic other types of disabilities. So there might be a perfectionistic quality and they want things absolutely perfect. They may erase excessively because they want everything looking, the same and looking exactly perfect. They may have it completed and they may be worried that it's not correct and that they're going to get things marked wrong, and so they may not want to turn it in. So there's a lot of things that happen with not turning in homework. We always try to mark the things that are correct. And so they're seeing everything that they have correct on the paper instead of marking things that are wrong. It may be kind of working through the process and saying, you did a really good job. You looked it over twice. It's good. We're going to turn it in and see what happens. And it may be, working with the teacher to let them know, like they're nervous about turning homework in. And so how can we get them to feel a little bit more comfortable? And maybe they go over the homework with the teacher together, at another time during the day so that they feel a little bit less anxious about that. But sometimes if they're not turning in homework, it's not that they haven't gotten it done. It's just that they really are worried that it might not be completed. It may not be good enough, or, they may have ripped the corner or ripped the page. Again, you have to label that, whether it's a little problem or a big problem, you have to kind of question them and kind of help guide them through that process as to why we need to turn the homework in. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? The worst thing that's going to happen is you might have every single question wrong. What's the best thing that's going to happen? The best thing that's going to happen is you may have 100% correct. So it may be somewhere in the middle where you may get something wrong, but that it's really okay and it's not the end of the world. They also may avoid socializing. So they're afraid of what others will think. They may want to avoid recess. They may want to avoid the cafeteria and eating. They may want to avoid gym. So they're afraid that other people are going to be making comments or making decisions or coming up with things about them. And that's not necessarily something that they feel comfortable with. So they don't want to make mistakes in front of others. So when it comes to recess, a lot of times there's social stories that you can use to help them with the anxiety. It could be prepping them ahead of time. So like, okay, you're going to go to recess. When you go to recess, who is someone that you want to play with? Okay, what's something that you're going to be able to do? So it's kind of role playing and figuring out what you can do to kind of help them in that situation. We want to make sure that they are, putting themselves outside of their comfort zone to recognize that they can handle things. So it's making sure that we're working on, what's going to happen in this situation, how can we prepare for that situation, and role playing those things to make them feel as comfortable as possible when they're starting something new or starting something different. So how do we help students in the JB classroom? So we do a lot of things when it comes to scaffolding. So we're building on where they are. We want to make sure that we are giving them things that they feel confident and secure in. So it may be doing things that are a little bit easier for them, just for them to be able to get that sense of confidence and get that sense of, I understand this, I get this. And we want to make sure that they're mindful of what their comfort zone is. We always, and one of the things that a doctor had told me when I was working with my kids was, you want to teach where you want them to be and not where they are currently. So we want to be mindful of their comfort zone, but we do want to push them a little bit outside of their comfort zone. We know that we can't give into that anxiety. We have to work with them where they're at, but teach them the strategies that are going to help them get to be where they want to be and where we need them to be. So if you are working with the students and it's at our school, we may say, okay, we're going to go out to recess. Maybe you're going to go to recess for the first 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back in here into the classroom. We've done before where music was very difficult for them, and it could have been partially a sensory issue, but it was also just being anxious because they wanted to be able to play the instruments and they didn't know how to play the instruments, and it was causing them anxiety because they wanted to be able to play it in a certain way. So, okay, you're going to go to music class for 5 minutes, then we're going to come back and we'll kind of talk about it a little bit, and then kind of extending that time so that they're feeling comfortable in what they're capable of doing and what they're able to do, but then pushing them into their ability to kind of go beyond their comfort zone. As a parent, one of the hardest things to keep in mind is that you cannot give in to their anxiety. As teachers, we try to, again, push them out of that comfort zone. So we recognize that you're feeling anxious about this. Your body's telling us that you feel anxious about this because we can see that you're breathing kind of hard, or you're, kind of getting up out of your desk and walking around. So this is what we're going to do, and kind of presenting it in a way so that they can kind of have those small steps that are going to help them be successful. The other thing that happens is we want to make sure that we're not self-sabotaging something without realizing. So things can be very well intentioned, but may not necessarily be helpful. So if a student is anxious and they're trying to avoid school, if you're allowing them to stay home from school, you're teaching them the habit of, okay, it's becoming a bigger problem in their head by not being able to answer or go to school or kind of say that they're not feeling well. If you're kind of making excuses and saying, okay, well, you don't do this homework assignment tonight, it's too hard, that's okay, we won't, you're getting upset about it, asking them, okay, let's do these first 5 problems and then we'll see where we're at. We'll work on this problem together, and then I want to see you do one problem on your own. The anxiety kind of happens when it's all of the things that they're thinking about that's going to happen in their mind or in their head. And so it's giving them that opportunity to recognize, what, I have the tools to handle this. So if it was my worst case scenario, I'm doing okay with it and I can handle the situation. Structure and routine is really important. I am very structured and routine at school. I am not so much structure and routine when I get home. And so it was really having to be, morning routine was the same morning routine during the week as it was on the weekend. Bedtime was the same bedtime during the weekend as it was during the week. So it was that structure and routine because it helps them feel less anxious. And as they're working on those situations, they're able to kind of handle things a little bit better. The other thing is we always talk about that positive mental attitude and that empowerment and that control. So, yes, you're feeling a little bit anxious. What are you able to control in this situation? You can go outside to recess, and yes, you're anxious about recess, but what you can do is maybe figure out, okay, who are you going to ask to play, or what game are you going to play? What are you going to do when your friend says, well, I don't want to play that game? So it's trying to figure out how they can take control of that situation. If it's working on the homework assignment, okay, what can you control about the homework assignment? Well, you can control that you are going to do at least 3 problems without, asking your mom for help, or 3 problems before you raise your hand, or you can control that you're going to use this worksheet that kind of your teacher has given you as a resource. So what are some things that you can do in order to control that situation? There's always a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is why we always push that positive mental attitude. So if you talk positively, your body and your mind is going to follow that. So if you think to yourself, you know what, I'm going to go into school today, it's going to be a great day. My teacher is going to be thrilled to see me here. I'm going to be able to play with everyone at recess. If you have that positive self-talk going in your head, it's more likely that those things are going to happen. We also focus on celebrating the successes. So, if we know that something was really difficult for someone to do, even if it's a small thing. So it could be, you asked your friend to play, and, yes, they might have said, I don't want to play that today, but you actually went out of your comfort zone and asked them to play. That is fantastic. What are we going to do next? So like, you can ask your friend to play. Now, if they say no, look to see someone might be kind of on the swings or might also be by themselves, and ask them to play. So it's celebrating the successes, no matter how small they are. The other thing is working on that grit and growth mindset. And that's something that we're really going to be looking at in the next few years, is working on that perseverance. So when things are difficult, that doesn't mean that you stop. It means that you need to continue to work, and you may not be able to do it right this second, but you're going to be able to do it next. And we want to make sure that we're focusing on, it may be difficult now, but you're going to be able to get there. And this is what we're going to do to get that. The other thing is use natural examples and show how you talk throughout this situation. So you want to make sure that if you're finding something difficult, that you explain kind of how you did that. So I probably have some social anxiety that was not, officially diagnosed, but a lot of the things that my younger son goes through, I kind of understand. So I get nervous when I have to go someplace where I don't know someone, or I have to make small talk. I'm not very good at small talk. And so I tell him, like, I usually come up with 5 questions that I can ask to think about what I can ask someone when I'm in this situation. And I know if I ask this question, a lot of times people start talking because it's a question that's not just a yes or no question. And then they start talking, and then I start to feel a little bit more comfortable once we're having that conversation. And point out your own mistakes. Many times I've said, I felt anxious about this and I froze and I didn't turn the paper in, and then, I didn't get a good grade. And so I realized that I have to take things in small steps. Or I get nervous if I'm not prepared. And so I try to do this, and this before a test in order to help myself prepare. So it's helping them see those natural examples and making sure that you're focusing on what you should do. The other thing we do is we kind of chunk things. So if it's a long-term assignment, don't wait for the student to say, okay, or your child to say, I'm going to do this outline now, and I'm going to do these set of questions today. So our summer reading program, these kids have to read a certain number of books. And so, your child may not say at the start of the summer, I'm going to do this and I'm going to read a little bit every day. So don't wait for them to do it. Make sure that you are helping them do that. So you may start in the summer and say, okay, we know that you want to read X number of books. This book is your first book. It's 120 pages. So you're going to have to read 20 pages a night. So why don't we sit down every night at this time and we'll read, and we can do, you read a couple pages, I read a couple pages, or we can read the book together and then discuss. But you might not always want to wait for them to do that. You're going to want to try to force that sometimes to get them comfortable with breaking into smaller parts and then following through on those. So those larger assignments, you're going to break them into manageable pieces. So we do have a couple questions. I am not able to see them on my webinar, so we are going to have them come through. Yes, it says, is some of this normal to some extent, and doesn't some of these happen some of the time, and when is it more than the norm? So as we had said kind of at the beginning, yes, some of it is normal. So separation anxiety happens very normally when kids are little. And so it may be that, they start crying when they separate from mom. But that doesn't mean that, you can't separate from them. So we notice a lot of times in kindergarten, the kids will start crying when they leave mom and dad, and they're clinging to mom and dad. But I would say 99% of the time, as soon as they walk through the doors and get away from the front foyer area, they've stopped crying. And by the time they get into the classroom, they're completely fine. So if it's something where, you know, they're really clinging and then we notice that they're crying the entire time in the classroom, or if we notice that their, you know, it's their anxiousness is preventing them from doing something that they really want to do, that's when it gets a little bit beyond just that normal situation. So if it's preventing them from doing something that they enjoy, if it's kind of preventing them from doing things that, you know, they should want to try to do, trying new things, if it's preventing them from, you know, kind of making friends or going out or doing things, once it becomes extensive and over a long period of time and it's preventing them from doing something that they want or preventing them from doing something that they need to do in school, then that's beyond the norm, and that's when you want to talk to a doctor about it. Let's see if there's any other questions that come up. I'm going to escape from here. Yeah, so a few people have asked if this will be shared with everyone who's attended. We will send out the presentation and the recording to everyone who's attended later on today. So you will be able to access that recording. So it'll be available moving forward. The next webinar series that we have coming up is Understanding and Addressing K-8 Behavioral Issues Tied to Anxiety. And then we also have Understanding the Relationship Between Trauma and Anxiety in K-8 Children. So those are two webinars that will be coming up on May 11th and May 18th. We are at the 12:45, a little bit over, but we'll see if there's any other questions. If you have questions moving forward and you realize after maybe you've watched the webinar a second time, or you've realized that you meant to ask a question, please feel free to reach out to us at school. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have, even if you send it to the general info email that's on our webpage. We'll make sure that it gets to someone that can answer your question. But we do appreciate everyone attending our webinar on the anxiety series. This is something that definitely is impacting a lot of our kids here at JB, as well as our own kids that we may have. And so it's something that it's important for us to kind of take hold of and make sure that we are working in manageable ways to kind of help our kids. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you for attending and taking time out of your day.